Now, it might sound like make-believe, but experts believe foreign accent syndrome is a real condition. It is where people suddenly wake up sounding like they're from a country that they might never have stepped foot in. Here's an example of one Australian woman who went from sounding like this.
For somebody that's very inexperienced like myself, it made me feel a lot more comfortable about, stepping up and going on the track with 80 other guys.
Just sounding like this.
It's like a mixture of different accents, and it's what I used to sound like before the stroke. I sounded very Australian.
So she's had a stroke. Joining us now to tell us more about this rare condition is University of Sydney Professor of Speech Pathology, Kerry Ballard. Kerry, thank you for being with us. Good morning.
Good morning, Ryan. Thank you for inviting me.
Is it real? Because I think a lot of people are sceptical about the claims when they are made. Is it an actual condition?
Yes, definitely. It is an actual condition, but it can be caused by two different things. So I think that's where people get a bit sceptical. Would you like me to explain?
Yeah. What are these things?
Yeah. So that example you just heard was a woman who had a stroke. And it's not uncommon after a stroke to have difficulty with talking. So the muscles in your lips and tongue and voice can be affected. And so you have more difficulty speaking. And you noticed with her, she was much slower and her speech sounds had changed quite a bit. So that's a legitimate condition that is caused by a clear neurological event with damage to some neurological tissue in the brain. But there's a second type, and that is a condition that is still real, but we can't find any neurological reason for it. So it's thought that some people liken it to hardware and software. The hardware of the brain is still intact and looks fine, but something's gone a little bit funny with the software. It's got a little bit corrupted, and we don't know why. And that's the one that people get a bit sceptical about.
Right. I think the strange part is if you've never been to the country before and you suddenly start impersonating or taking on the accent, how does your brain, if you have never learnt that accent before, if you've never been exposed to it in any great quantity, how does your brain know how to do it?
How to do it. That's right. Well, I think, we're all exposed to lots of accents over our life, whether or not we've been to those countries. We hear them on television, and people that we meet have different accents. But in the case of the stroke, it's not that they're imitating. Like the woman said, her voice sounded like she had a mixture of accents, and it's sort of an accidental outcome of the way her mouth is now having to produce these different sounds because it doesn't move quite as well as it used to. And so it ends up sounding like a different accent, even though it's not. And that's why you tend to get sort of this mixture of accents. It's sort of just an outcome of the way she now has to speak because her muscles aren't working properly.
It's quite rare, isn't it? How many people does this actually affect?
Oh, it is rare. Some people will say that over a career you might see fewer than one handful. I have in the past, I've been working as a speech pathologist for about 40 years, and I've seen I think about 4. But oddly, 3 of those have been in the last couple of years.
Really? Okay, that's interesting because there are a whole bunch of and I don't want to sound too sceptical, but of supposedly neurological conditions which have been expanded in number quite rapidly over the last few years, as has social media and things like TikTok, where, people are getting tics, which they've never had before, at alarming rates, which humans have never experienced before. Do you think it's possible that with the increase in social media and the exposure to it, that these types of conditions that there might be some false cases coming through?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are some of these cases where Well, it's very interesting. So some people, for the cases that don't have a good neurological reason for why they have this foreign accent, that's where these are known as functional neurological disorders, or another term is biopsychosocial disorders, and that's where you tend to find these things clustering in certain cultures or environments. There's a fascinating book written by a neurologist in London called The Sleeping Beauties, which documents quite a number of these clusters of functional neurological disorders around the world, not just foreign accent syndrome, but other conditions as other behaviours that manifest. And these are thought to be influenced by what's happening around you. So I think, yes, I think there is a risk that the more you hear about these things in social media, the more likely it is that you might start to see a couple more cases of it. It's sort of the power of suggestion. And it's not that individuals are doing this intentionally to try to get attention or money, or it's the brain does strange things, right? And so sometimes individuals develop these conditions because of other psychological issues going on, or reactions to things in their environment, and it manifests in this way because we don't know why, because perhaps they've seen this happen before, and so their brain sort of falls into this pattern. They're very unusual conditions, the functional neurological disorders, and we don't really understand them at all. But we do recognise that people aren't necessarily doing it consciously and intentionally. They're almost like their brain is playing a trick on them.
Yeah.
But in the cases of the stroke patients, it's legitimate, and it's real, and there's a clear reason for it. And when we analyse with our measurement tools, when we analyse what they're doing with their oral muscles and movements, it's quite easy to understand why they're doing what they're doing, and it takes a lot of exercise and rehabilitation to reverse that accent.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Kerry, thank you very much for explaining that to us. Kerry Ballard, University of Sydney, Professor of Speech Pathology, talking about foreign accent syndrome. It's 5 away from 8 o'clock.